All right, a great big post-long weekend welcome to all you glorious Herle Burlyites. So last week I quoted a podcast review, and I don't usually do two of these in a row because I don't want all of you to think I've got a big head, even though objectively I do have an enormous noggin. But I really love how Darcy Wallace summed up our show in a post he wrote 9 days ago. He said that the Herle Burly is the perfect mix of Meet the Press and Wayne's World we never knew we needed. Excellent! Party on, Darcy. We're not worthy. It's another two-part pod for y'all today. Part one, I am chuffed to welcome Jonathan Allen and Amie Parnes to the podcast. Jonathan and Amie are the New York Times best-selling authors of Shattered, the definitive account of Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. They're here today to talk about their brand new book, Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency. It wasn't just 43,000 votes spread out across Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin that made the difference. Biden was damned lucky in lots of ways. We'll get into all of it. Part two is our political panel with Jenny Byrne and Scott Reed. We're going to pick up on the conversation with Jonathan and Amie. We'll talk about Mark Carney's highly anticipated attendance at the Liberal Convention next week. We're also going to talk about this COVID third wave and what happens when your policy making reflects politics and not good policy. Half measures get you hated by all comers, and Doug Ford and his lockdown logic holes had a very bad week. And of course, we'll shout our hey yous into the social media void as we do every week. Jonathan and Amie, thank you for coming on the Herle Burly today. I'm very privileged to have you come on the show.
Thanks, David. We're so happy to be here.
I'm Burly, so I think Amy's Herle with you, along with you.
So, listen, it is a year into the pandemic, or a little bit more than a year into the pandemic. And up here in Canada, we are still all afraid, huddled in our houses, hopefully waiting for our grandparents to get an appointment to get a vaccination. What's life like for you right now?
I'm halfway vaccinated, thankfully. My mom, thankfully, is fully vaccinated. So, but yeah, it's been a year of lockdown for us. And having a child during a lockdown is an utter nightmare, as I'm sure a lot of people can attest.
And I'm sitting outside here in lovely Washington, D.C. on my back patio where I've been for the last year. It's a beautiful space, but it's a very small one. And I'm double vaccinated now, which is nice. But I have to wait a couple weeks before I'm sort of officially good. And then I guess we're all going to be wearing masks for the rest of our lives.
Is that how you feel about it?
What, that I'll be wearing a mask for the rest of my life? Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I will be, but
God.
I think there's going to be a fundamental change in society where the fear of infection for a lot of people creates sort of new routines. I probably won't wear a mask everywhere, but some people will.
So let's get into this book. But before we do, I want to talk about Hillary Clinton. Because you've written a lot about Hillary Clinton. You've chronicled her career in 2 books. And then there was this exercise you've had of getting to examine this election and learning everything about what people did and tried to do to win this election. How did all of that affect your perception of Hillary and Hillary's campaign? Do you have a retrospective take on Hillary's campaign for the presidency?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say about that is Joe Biden is considered to be the sort of broad perception of him is like extremely affable. He's the likable guy for the Democrats, and Hillary Clinton's broad perception was the exact opposite. And that does not mean that there aren't a ton of people in the United States who love Hillary Clinton, and certainly around the world who love Hillary Clinton. But I think, within the construct of partisan politics, she's almost the opposite of Biden. And I think what we learned from this, or at least what I learned from this, was this process of writing the next book about this other guy, is that the marginal difference between being the candidate who is, the most polarizing in your party and the one who is the least polarizing in your party is tiny. I mean, we are so closely divided that everything here is marginal. I mean, our Senate is 50-50 right now. The Democrats own 51% of the House seats. They don't own them. They have a lease on them. And Biden won with 7 million extra votes, but it was really the 43,000 that made the difference in the Electoral College, which is just a tiny fraction of the 158 million people who voted in the country.
Yeah, and I think there were a lot of lessons to be learned from 2016. I think if you read Shattered and then you read Lucky, you kind of see that Democrats they didn't want another 2016. They didn't want that deja vu experience. It was horrifying for them. And so a lot of this book and a lot of what happened in the election is essentially a reaction, a strong reaction to what happened in 2016, and to not make the same mistakes and to not allow Bernie Sanders to go into the summer with his campaign. And I think that's sort of the differences you see. If you read Shattered and you lived through the 2016 election and you lived through 2020 and you read Lucky, you'll see sort of how one connects to the other, and one is a strong reaction to the other.
I'm somebody who helped get a woman elected Premier of Ontario, and then watched her become subject to the kind of hate and vitriol I've never seen in politics in my life, directed towards somebody in politics. How much of it's just misogyny and how much of it's Hillary personally?
I think they're inextricable with Hillary, because she came of age politically in a different era. Right now in the United States, and I think in a lot of places in the world, there's this sort of recognition about the bad behavior of men and about misogyny that at least is something that's like somewhat publicly discussed. But when Hillary Clinton was first lady, and when she was on the campaign trail with Bill Clinton, she represented a threat to an entire way of life, an entire patriarchal way of life in the United States. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to divide her personally from sexism in this country, because I can't think of any person who has endured such misogyny over such a long period of time in the public eye as Hillary Clinton. And in a way, when somebody breaks, what she calls the glass ceiling, when a woman becomes president of the United States, they will be standing on Hillary Clinton's shoulders, and benefiting from all of the incredible invective that's come her way. I mean, and what's amazing here is that people think that it's appropriate to depict her in ways that they would never, ever think of depicting other women, like women that they know. It's so far beyond the pale with her.
Amy, you got a thought about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I agree with John and everything he said. I do think that a lot of it was misogyny, but I do think that Hillary was so polarizing. So many people liked her and hated her. And I think that sort of led to, I think either people fell into two camps. They liked her, they didn't like her. And if you didn't like her, you had huge feelings about her. And that sort of was part of what happened and what led to her loss in 2016.
Interesting. Okay. So flashing forward, your book gave me PTSD, because I was absolutely destroyed on election night, 2020, by the closeness of the race. Even though it was evident that Biden was likely to win, even on election night, the very closeness of it just made me sad. Because even though rationally I had known that it was close, in my gut, in my heart, I felt, how can people vote for Trump? Seriously, how can people vote for Trump? But it was incredibly close, as the book lays out in great detail. What do you think he could have done to win? When you looked at the whole thing, knowing who he is and what's within his realm of consideration, what might have put him over the top if he'd done something differently?
I think if he would have been a little more presidential, if he would have, come out of the hospital after having COVID and said, I went through it, it was really tough, I understand it now. I think he could have easily won. And if people on the other side are being honest with you on the Biden side, and some of them were, they admitted as much. They said, if he would have done just a little bit more, if he would have been a little more of a president, would have given people, been a little more empathetic, even showed some empathy throughout the COVID experience, even before he had it. If he wouldn't have asked people to inject bleach, any of those things, he probably would have been president again.
Yeah, and I think that I agree again with everything Amy said. That the thing I would add to that sort of that presidential need that he had here, he's the sitting president of the United States, and in the first debate with Joe Biden, and we recount this in the book, but in the first debate with Joe Biden, he gets advised that he should try to step on what Biden is saying, to try to force Biden into stuttering or stumbling, and that basically Biden looks presidential and Trump looks unpresidential, and it's the one sort of thing that, I guess you would say, I can't define what presidential is, but I know it when I see it. And Donald Trump looked unpresidential, ceding the biggest advantage that a president has to Joe Biden, who suddenly looked like the president of the United States, a month out from the election. This is, to me, the smallest tweak that's got to be worth 43,000 votes.
Man, so after writing these books that you've written, where you spend enormous amounts of time talking to political professionals about what they did or what they observed other people do or what all this stuff is, what do you think of the political class of strategists and tacticians, given that the story of your book is, and I'm leapfrogging off of what Jonathan just said, the story of your book is that Biden had a terrible, terrible, terrible campaign and won the nomination. And then Trump had nothing resembling a campaign. Like you were referencing debate, what he was advised, but he wasn't really advised because, as I read in the book, there was no one stream of advice to him going into the debate. There were multiple streams of advice to him going into the debate, and they didn't even have debate prep, which is just one of a million examples of how nothing that looks like a normal professional campaign went on in the Trump campaign, and yet he almost won the presidency. So who needs people like me? What is the value?
Well, I think number one, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, Joe Biden's got a process, what one would recognize almost as a government-like process, and his team basically does what it can to come to consensus as it advises him. And sometimes he tells them to go take a long walk off a short pier. But a staff is supposed to come up with a unanimous recommendation to the president or to a candidate. And if they can't, to lay it out in sort of civil terms, like here's why we want to do X or Y. But usually as you well know, what the principal gets is, here's option A. It's a very good option. It's fantastic. Here's option B that's way too soft, way too mild. And here's option C that's way too hard, like, nuking the universe to to win a vote or something. And so they're supposed to be able to understand, like, obviously option A is the one you go for. Or in some cases, the model's more like, here's A and B is the nuking the universe. And they're supposed to understand. But basically, your staff's supposed to be able to come to a consensus. And Trump didn't have that going on with him. I think Biden did. And you hope that your staff is smart enough to come to a consensus that guides you well. And that perhaps you get a little bit lucky.
Yeah, and I do think that this election was obviously an anomaly. I mean, I think that people like you will be valuable in this coming election and the future elections. I just don't see another one happening like this one. I mean, at least right now.
What do you think made it so unique, Amie?
Donald Trump. He threw everything out the window, everything that we saw in traditional campaigns. He didn't understand COVID. He didn't understand the ramifications even of COVID. We have a scene in the book where he's talking to his campaign manager at the time, and his campaign manager is essentially saying that COVID could be his undoing, and the president doesn't even understand in the moment why. And how it's connected to politics, which basically tells you everything you need to know about this man and about the election that was run. And also going back to the closeness and what we talked about earlier, and had he done just, acted a little more like a traditional president, he could have won again.
And, David, I think that when you look at the United States and you look at our politics, one of the fascinating, unique things about Donald Trump is, for years we've tried to figure out why our voters are so apathetic. That is to say, like most presidential elections, you're looking at half or less than half of the country that's eligible comes out to vote, and it took Donald Trump to get us record numbers of voters to the polls in both parties. We saw this incredible increase over we went from roughly 126 million people voting to 158 million people voting in one election cycle. And I think most of us thought somebody will come along that everyone sees as very good and will have important moments and people will want to come out to vote. And what we really saw was Donald Trump driving what I call love click, hate click, like on the internet, the things that people will click on whether they love it or hate it. Like Donald Trump is that thing. And so, I think a lot of us have to sort of reassess a little bit about what inspires people, but certainly hatred and fear are a big part of that.
Look, I know I talk a lot on this show about things I'm passionate about. I can break them down into color categories. Green for my football team. Bleu, blanc, et rouge for hockey. Orange, of course, for snack foods. But especially in these last few years, as this late model Herle has gone into the shop for a few repairs, I find myself thinking a hell of a lot more about health, as one does. I told you last week how our presenting sponsor TELUS is working to make their 5G network as impactful as possible for all Canadians. Health, more specifically digital healthcare, is right at the top of their priorities. 5G is going to make the internet 10 to 100 times faster than it is now. And that means TELUS can dramatically expand and improve their digital healthcare services. These are programs that help keep us healthy, accessed at lightning speed in the moment we need the care most. Babylon by TELUS Health brings medical advice from doctors or nurses directly to patients over their smartphone. So, let's say a patient has a severe chronic condition, like kidney disease. They can monitor health factors from their own home and share the information electronically with their doctor. No more having to make a physically uncomfortable and potentially unwise trip to the office. 5G also means better health outcomes, as it's going to expand how clinicians use TELUS electronic medical records and instantly link over 6,500 pharmacies with TELUS pharmacy management tools. All of this thinking by TELUS surrounding 5G goes beyond simple connectivity. It addresses a deeper social issue: how we can access the care we need to stay healthier. Not to mention, it'll create an estimated 250,000 jobs and contribute $40 billion annually to our economy. Herle Burlyites, it leads to a more prosperous and successful Canada. You can find out more about all of this at telus.com/5G. Is the logical conclusion of that if everybody in the United States voted, we probably wouldn't like the result?
You have to go back. You have to go into the demographics and try to extrapolate them. I think if you're on the left, you would like the result if more people voted. And the proof is in the pudding. What you've got here in the states right now is Republicans in states all over the country trying to push voter restriction laws. And so they understand that they have a choice between trying to win more of the people who vote or trying to get fewer people to vote. And they've essentially, for the moment, abandoned persuading people in favor of preventing people from voting.
Right. Which is odd, Amy, given how well Trump did in the Latino community and even in the Black community.
Yeah, that's what I think was most astonishing about this race, is that everyone kept talking about his base and how his base wasn't expanding throughout the election. I remember, nothing was moving and people, even Republicans, were doubting that they had the voters. And the Trump campaign internally saw that they were actually doing much better than polling indicated, and that they were growing, and that they had essentially tapped into Hispanic and African-American communities, and had taken those voters away from Democrats again. They were speaking to them. And I think a lot of Black voters in particular felt like the party had left them in 2016. And polls sort of reflected that after the fact. And I think what Donald Trump did well and his campaign did well, was tap into that feeling of maybe abandonment, and that the Republican Party and that Donald Trump was actually helping them. And so he was able to do something that no one else really imagined him doing, which was turning out all these voters and expanding his base.
And Donald Trump has always had some feel for, for lack of a better term, the appeal of machismo to young people, to young men in particular. And I mean, you talk to political analysts and aides, and what you hear is young Black men, young Hispanic men are drawn to Donald Trump in ways that their female and older counterparts in those communities are not. And I think we saw that happen this time.
Fuck men are dumb, eh?
I'm sorry?
I said fuck men are dumb, eh?
Yeah, well, well, I mean, look, I reflect that, or did 25 years ago. But what's interesting about Trump is, in part, he was pitting those groups against each other and doing better with both of them.
Amazing.
It's just, you could see in the Latino community, his response to the protests for racial justice was popular. He was saying we're going to have safer communities, law and order, and, protect businesses. And that didn't play well with all Hispanics. I mean, still, Trump did worse with Hispanics than Biden did, but the margins changed in a way that's favorable to Republicans.
Yeah. So Joe Biden, I wasn't a fan. I had not been a fan in his two previous runs for the presidency. I never saw anything special about him. I loved several of the other candidates that were in the race. And I read 400 pages about him, courtesy of the two of you. And I'm not more impressed than I was before I read the book. The book, I don't know whether you intended this or not, does not really, at the end of the day, blow you away about Joe Biden. Was he the right choice? At the end of the day, did that process yield the right choice? Was he, as some people say, for all of the things that are potentially disappointing about him, was he the perfect candidate to beat Trump? Or was he, or would Elizabeth Warren have knocked him out of the park?
I think Warren would have had a chance. She was definitely a contender in the fall of 2019. But I do think that what Joe Biden did have and what Hillary did not have in 2016 is a consistent message, a message that he started the campaign with, and it took him throughout the campaign into the end. And I think that message was, look, I'm the only one who can really beat Donald Trump. And that ended up being true, I think. And I think that's why a lot of people, there wasn't that candidate like him that could appeal to both sides of the party, a very fractured party, even still today, that's sort of stitched together. But I think that he is sort of the one person who could kind of unify and unite the party. And that's sort of why I think he chose to campaign on that platform, to bring everyone together. I do think that someone like Bernie Sanders would have had trouble in the end, appealing to more conservative Democrats and even never Trumpers. I think that a lot of people would have had a hard time kind of going to the ballot for him. But I do think that Biden, at the end of the day, he didn't run a great campaign, but I think he was the candidate of choice because he could kind of unite the party.
I think a lot of the left has to deal with the sort of uncomfortable truth of having to have stuffed their own priorities into the back seat to get rid of Trump by electing Biden. And for the moment, they'll say laudatory things about Biden, but let's be honest. I mean, they the left really swallowed hard in picking a guy who wasn't just centrist for the moment, who was centrist for 1974. And so, I think it's sort of a moment where the left is really trying to figure out how do they regather and strengthen their numbers so that the next time this kind of choice comes around, it's obvious that they have, a better program or platform or whatever, because to the extent that Biden was the right candidate for the moment, it was a little bit that he was kind of a compromise between Obama and Trump, and a lot about the personal elements that he put forward, the compassion that we talked about, basic character, competence in government, and all of those things were unifying for everybody from the left to the Republicans who had been disaffected from Trump. They just wanted to see competent government and compassion. And so that's not hard for Bernie Sanders folks to get behind. I mean, it's not shockingly hard for them to get behind. They just have to decide that it's better to have Biden than Trump.
Let me ask you a difficult question, or at least an uncomfortable question. You followed him and watched him very, very closely, much more closely than I. Does he have you made it clear in the book that he's not the person he once was as a result of age. Does he have the stamina, the energy, the neurons firing to do this job?
I think he has the stamina. Anyone who can go through that race, particularly against Donald Trump, I think has the stamina. But I do think that, and the last few weeks and a couple months are proof of that. He's sort of, I think most people in the country right now, polls have him at around 60%. I think people are happy with how he's handled. As John mentioned, he does have that experience, which he campaigned on. But I do think there were a lot of problems for him in the campaign that he had to overcome. For starters, he is sort of a gaffe machine, as people like to say. And there was talk about how to kind of help him alleviate that problem. And I think that's sort of why we talk about COVID kind of helping him in the general election, because it helped him kind of stay in his basement, as Republicans mocked him for. But it took him off the campaign trail for months and months, where he couldn't be out there stumbling and making gaffes. And he had that problem a little bit in the primary. So I do think that he definitely had some problems to overcome. And it's early in his presidency, and we'll have to see what happens.
Dennis Martinez was a different pitcher for the Orioles in the 70s than he was for the Expos a decade later. A little bit less on the fastball, but it didn't mean he couldn't be effective in his own way. And in some ways, I think of Biden as sort of like a crafty older athlete. He's not as fast as the other guys. He can't cut corners quite the same way, but he's learned something about the game and about what voters want and what the role needs to be, which is literally, it seems, not much more than standing in front of a teleprompter reading the right words instead of freelancing like Trump and saying everything wrong.
That's good to hear. That's all reassuring. Just going forward, I would advise you Americans to start looking for a bit younger people. Just, you don't have to be governed by people in their 80s.
I thought Betty White was going to be the vice presidential choice.
Oh, my God. Exactly. If there was one element of the story I still didn't feel that I fully understood after I read your book, was the collapse of the Democratic field after South Carolina going into Super Tuesday. I haven't, and to me it is the all of the other candidates throwing in the towel between South Carolina and Super Tuesday. It still doesn't make a ton of sense to me that they all did that and all did that in the same way because of their own volition, which is kind of how it reads in the book, that, Buttigieg is sitting around going, well, my campaign looks like I don't have a path anymore. And Warren was coming to the same conclusion and Klobuchar, etc. But for them all to come to the same conclusion after one, which is that they could never win any minority votes, after one primary that involved minority voting population, it seems suspicious to me. I'm still inclined to think there is some coordinating force, some deus ex machina in the party that all got together and went to those people and said, you got to get out because we're not having Sanders do this to us.
It's really Barack Obama is your deus ex machina. And we touch on what we were able to report. Our books are written by what we can report and confirm. And so we have suspicions about a variety of other sort of pieces but centrally, that's Barack Obama getting on the phone. It's him getting on the phone, sending emails, having emissaries go out and delivering the message that it's time to get behind Joe Biden. We see the day after the South Carolina primary, his big fundraiser, a guy named Rufus Gifford, sends out an email to 800 members of Obama's finance network. He would never have done that without approval to engage them, and says, look, get off the sidelines. It's time for you to get in behind Biden. Talk to each other within a party. So much as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren might not like each other at a moment, or Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar might not like each other at a moment, all of them have staffers who are in contact with each other. The idea that the Democratic Party the establishment of the party was ready to make its choice definitely is driven by Barack Obama. And we could see pieces of that. So those were the ones that we illuminated, including his call to Buttigieg to endorse Biden after Buttigieg drops out. The calls he makes to Amy Klobuchar that she's dodging because she knows that Obama's going to tell her to get out. The way she knows that is that she has staffers that are talking to other staffers, and it may be indirect. And so some of that we weren't quite able to nail down, but it's clear that Obama is that deus ex machina.
Interesting.
Yeah, I also think that, as I mentioned before, Democrats were so horrified by what happened in 2016 that sort of loomed over this campaign in a big way. No one wanted that to happen. So you had Obama making 4 calls to Bernie Sanders, which is a lot for him, for someone who was staying off to the sidelines for the entirety of the campaign, making sure that Bernie Sanders would get out of the race in the right way and get behind Joe Biden in the right way. All of this from Barack Obama to sort of ensure that Democrats wouldn't see a repeat of 2016 and wouldn't allow Donald Trump to win again. So I think the ghost of 2016 is sort of what drove all these people out of the race so quickly as to not have a repeat again.
Right. Never see anything like that turn around in politics, eh? Like, he was dead in the water. He was in the ditch until Clyburn comes along. It's over. As you document, he's out of money. He's out of votes. It's over.
Even the low bars that he's setting for himself, like, I want to win or I want to come in second in Nevada to come back from 4th and 5th place finishes in Iowa and New Hampshire. Even that bar, he barely clears it by like 2 or 3 points, edging out Buttigieg in Nevada after, throwing all of his last money and energy into it. It's like, you're like, this is going to end, and it's going to end badly. And even the people around him were telling him it's in every way except for, hey, Joe, you got to get out. They're telling him it's time to get out. Jen O'Malley Dillon, who becomes his general election campaign manager, goes out to volunteer for a week. She's like dispatched by another aide and needed done. And she's thinking as she goes out there, the likelihood is I'm going to be in charge of winding down, like the operations of winding down this campaign and, closing down the payroll, like sort of helping him get out gracefully. Not, it's likely that I'm going to end up managing a winning presidential campaign.
Okay, now Jen O'Malley Dillon. I wanted to talk to you about her. She's all over your book, like all over your book, and that is pretty interesting to Canadians because there's a Canadian connection that you may not be aware of, which is that Jen O'Malley Dillon has been an advisor on elections to Prime Minister Trudeau and his team since about 2012 or 2013. Very important in his initial victory in 2015. I think that there was a lot of technology transfer between the Obama people and the Trudeau people through her. And she was involved in the re-election in 2019 as well as an advisor. And I think she's pretty close friends with the Prime Minister's chief of staff, and she's now in the White House in a very senior capacity. I presume she'll be pretty instrumental to the Canada-U.S. relationship. What can you tell us about her? And in particular, I was interested in the book that she landed this big job in the White House, but she's not really a Bidenite, is she? She's not really part of the family.
No, she's an Obama person who was brought in to kind of help. She was the adult in the room, if you will, and came in to sort of save the general election. I think there was a lot of tension between her and a lot of the primary staffers, but she was very much sent in by Obama. Obama actually talked to Biden about her, said that he should have complete faith in her, and kind of sent her in to run the campaign. She is pretty much one of the best operatives that we have here. John and I wrote in Shattered that she was the runner-up for the Hillary Clinton campaign manager job. And a lot of people thought she should have had that job at the time. But what she did was kind of come in right as the general election was happening, right as I think her first day was on the day that they decided to close down the campaign, send people home because of COVID and the campaign offices. And so she comes in at the right time, brings in her people, brings in people who can help run this campaign, run more of a general operation, a general campaign. And so she is heralded and credited with almost saving this campaign. There are other people too, people like Anita Dunn, who also worked for Obama. They sort of put the campaign on their backs and helped it run.
And what's interesting is, Biden didn't need O'Malley Dillon to tell him where to land politically on a subject, but he did need her to know how to run a modern campaign in terms of the operations, the blocking and tackling, field operations, advertising, how all those things integrate with each other. And so while she's involved in the discussions of strategy, and we note where there's disagreement between her, particularly over policing reform, disagreement between her and her group with Biden and his sort of older white advisory group, it's really kind of a perfect complement for Biden in that he needed, the people he had hired for the primary in top roles were not operational executives in the way that O'Malley Dillon is. And here's somebody who, as a campaign manager, defeats an incumbent, which doesn't happen all that often, has to figure out how to raise money in a COVID era where she can't use her candidate to do it, and ends up raising record amounts of money. And of course, a lot of that had to do with people hating Trump, but, give her credit for innovation there. Has to figure out the mix of trying to make contact with voters in a safe way during COVID, and then actually get people out knocking on doors, which she had resisted doing for quite a while. And so, you look at this and you look at the barely that sort of small margin in those swing states. And you think to yourself, like, here's someone who is just highly competent and capable. And one of the ways that we see that as we did our reporting is the complaints about her are so dumb. The internal complaints about her are, she didn't listen enough to what I thought we should do, or she moved people into positions too fast or too slow. I mean, and just thinking, like, none of this is like huge strategic error. None of it is she treats everybody like crap. And so it dawned on us, I think, as we were reporting this, that like her critics are in a way her best chorus, because they sort of prove like how minuscule and picayune any of the complaints are compared to winning a presidential election over Donald Trump.
It starts with a mistake, though, doesn't it? In that, and it's probably Biden's mistake, not hers, which is that she comes in and she sees a bunch of incompetent people in their jobs, and instead of replacing them, she just puts a layer on top of them of people that she trusts and likes. So it's like, I remember I used to work with Hyundai in Canada here, and they had a Canadian team of executives, and then they had a bunch of Koreans overseeing all the Canadian executives and reporting back to Korea. It's kind of what I thought of when I read what she did in the campaign.
Yeah.
She came in and put a layer of Obama people on top of the Biden people.
We should have called that chapter "The Canadians and the Koreans."
So they were all around to still bitch about her for the rest of the campaign. It's interesting you said that he doesn't need Jen O'Malley Dillon to tell him where to settle on an issue or a position. One of the things I thought at the end of the book, I had concluded that neither Trump nor Biden liked taking advice from people.
That's correct. I mean, Biden wants a process. He wants to hear what the ideas are. You look at the people he surrounds himself with, and I think Jen O'Malley Dillon is like this. Certainly, Tony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State, is like this. Jake Sullivan, who's now the National Security Advisor. They all operate in a sort of traditional, process-driven advisory way. So what they're doing is, they end up being in top position, do what they can to, as we were talking about before, to sort out the problems before they get to the principal, so that he doesn't have to deal with a whole lot of disagreement on his staff, and it's either like a yes or no on what they want to do. He does not suffer being fought with by people who have been in politics for less of a time or been less successful. I think this is true of a lot of successful people, that they lose the ability to take advice because people have forever, in their own view, the world has told them not to do X, and they've been successful doing X. So why would they stop doing X? Which I think is dangerous. Personally, I think is dangerous. In terms of leadership, to get to that point where you're not really taking advice anymore.
I do too, but I've witnessed it happen to people. The longer they're in senior positions and in office, the more confident they get in their own capacities.
Yeah, they get very comfortable with that, and they get very comfortable with having a security detail. They like the SUVs and the nice private planes.
Okay, I got a few random questions about the campaign because we're getting tight on time. What do insiders say about the Lincoln Project and the impact of the Lincoln Project on the campaign?
I think it was, they were largely effective, but I don't know how much they moved the needle. I think their ads were kind of fun, and I think political operatives in particular kind of felt like their ads were fun. I don't know. I don't know their influence, that their influence ran so deep.
I haven't heard anyone outside the Lincoln Project suggest that the Lincoln Project was a factor in Joe Biden's victory.
Interesting. Okay, that's the answer. That is the answer to the question. One of the things, I'm a pollster also by trade, and one of the things that interested me was again the debate about the polling after, which was different than the debate after 2016, and it went to a really interesting place. And you document in the book about how, despite the sophistication of the Biden campaign by the end, and the lack of sophistication of the Trump campaign at the end, that the Trump campaign actually had a better handle on what was going to happen on election night than the Biden people did. And it goes to this question of, are there Americans who would be of a certain type of political inclination who can't be polled, who won't answer polls? And so therefore there was this group of people that were going to come vote for Trump that John Anzalone couldn't find.
Yeah, I mean, more or less. I mean, I think there's probably a mix of truths of why there's that gap of a few points pretty much everywhere. But yeah, I think there's a set of Americans who are Trump supporters who basically, if they hear somebody say I'm a pollster, they figure that that's a left-wing hack and that they're not going to participate in it. And, we noticed this when we were reporting on Shattered, that one of Clinton's longtime advisors told her, or actually didn't tell her, he sent a note to the campaign that ended up getting trashed, but he basically said, every time you see a Trump poll, add 3 or 4 points to his position and take 3 or 4 points away from yours. So, and that ended up being very prescient. And then we see in this election, the sort of same dynamic happening. I think also by the same token, and we kind of knew this all along, I thought we knew this all along, if you saw Trump approval ratings, his real numbers were always a little higher than what was sort of publicly out there. And if you see Biden approval ratings now, I think the reality is that they're probably a little bit lower than what we're seeing. So if he's at 60% approval, it's probably closer to 56, 57%.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that no one saw that Trump was moving at all. And I think that the ultimate outcome took the Biden people by surprise. I don't think they ever saw that Trump would have gained on them the way that he had.
It sounds like they completely missed the Latino move, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like I said, this election was a bit of an anomaly. I don't know if we'll see another one like it, but I think that that it completely threw them off guard, and no one saw that Trump would have made those gains. I don't think that, if people are being honest with you inside the campaign, I think that they'll tell you as much. That they didn't realize how they knew that it would be close, but not so close. And we have someone quoted in the book using some foul language, kind of reflecting as much.
David, you know this. I mean, you go into election day. You go into election day as an operative. You're hoping, if you were leading, that you were right with your polling, and you're hoping that if you're trailing by a little bit, that it rains in the right parts of the country for your candidate to win despite having been behind. And, both campaigns go into election day with some reason to hope that they will win and some reason to fear that they might lose. But the Democrats were definitely less afraid than they should have been as the numbers turned out. And the Trump people were pretty much on with where their numbers were. I mean, they thought there was a chance that they could win. And we recount this in the book. Bill Stepien, the campaign manager's like, yeah, I can see a map where we get to, a couple more electoral votes than the 270 you need, but we're really going to have a good day for that to happen. And elections that turn in several states, in each state by like 2/3 of a point, 1/4 of a point, that's nothing. I mean, from a statistical standpoint, if you do politics for a living, a bunch of races, in states with, several million people turning on 1/4%, 1/3%, 2/3 of a percent, that could go, anybody would call that a coin flip who does this for a living.
You mentioned Stepien, his campaign manager, and I just wanted to say again, I don't know if you intended to do this, but you turned Brad Parscale, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, you turned Brad Parscale into a sympathetic figure. You made me feel sorry for him. I had not felt that emotion before.
That's amazing. I don't know if we intended to do that. I think we were just trying to give people, like my mom, an image of who this guy was and where he came from and kind of how he came to be campaign manager.
My view is we've succeeded if you have both sympathy and some level of distaste for every character in a book, because we're all sort of multi-layered as human beings, and we haven't done our job if you have no sympathy for anyone in the book, or if there's anyone in the book for whom you can't see their point of view or have some sympathy for them, with the possible exception of well, never mind, I'm not going to go there. But for the most part,
yeah, come on, do it. Possible exception of who?
The authors. I was going to say of the authors. You need to have no sympathy for the authors.
I have tons of sympathy for the authors. I'll never have any sympathy for Donald Trump about anything.
Oh, well, you said it.
There you go. We've talked a little bit in this conversation, but not enough, about polarization in the United States, and about and where it comes into play in your book is the end of persuasion in campaigns, and how even O'Malley Dillon came to realize over the course of the campaign that she had to change her advertising from trying to persuade people to support Biden, and instead to reinforce people's existing support for Biden so that they would vote, care enough to turn out to vote. So this is now entirely a turnout exercise on both sides, with no attempt to persuade people. That's not the case in Canada. We are still seeing wild swings of opinion during election campaigns themselves. And whereas this glacial fight that you people are having, is that a Trump artifact, or is that America right now?
It's America. I mean, for the last 20 years, with the exception of 2008, we've had incredibly close elections. We've had very narrow margins, historically narrow margins in the House and the Senate here. We are stuck in this angrily, deeply divided, evenly divided, polarized era. And I'm not sure what breaks that fever, but I'm so glad that you brought that part of the book out, because so few people have talked about it. I think it's such an important way to understand elections, that they're really, like you say, the Biden people realized that their persuasion goal was to persuade people who already liked Biden to remain on board and not just stay home. I think there's a lot of percentage for people like politics right now, because if you can sway people, then it requires having a set of skills, communication skills, political savvy, a little bit of prescience. And right now, this is really all blocking and tackling on getting your own base out in the U.S., whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats. And both of them did a better job of it in 2020 than they did in 2016. Donald Trump's vote margin increased, I think it was 12 million votes, which is about 17%. And Biden's was like 23% over where Clinton was, with an additional, I'm just doing math in my head right now, but essentially an extra 16 million votes. So, we're kind of in a crazy place, and I don't know what breaks that fever.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, about Biden is that he campaigned kind of on unifying the country. And so far, he's really just, he hasn't been able to, he has these relationships with Republicans, but he hasn't been able to move the dial at all. And he's had to kind of depend on his own coalition to, for various, to move policy. And I don't think Republicans plan on changing that. They don't want to give him any low-hanging fruit even. So it'll be interesting to see how he's able to talk about that. And because he campaigned on unifying the country, and if he doesn't, I think a lot of people will sort of question that in the end.
Amie, just in brief, and it's so unfair to ask you to do this in brief, what do you think the core motivations of the Republican voter are right now? The people that will not move, will not even consider a Democrat. What are they about?
I think they're not about putting their country first. They're about putting their party first. And so, and I think it's a different kind of, this is not your grandfather's Republican Party anymore. It's a very different party. And I think even some conservatives are even questioning what kind of party it is. And so I don't know. I think a lot of people don't know what it stands for, who they represent anymore. And it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, if it kind of swings back in the other direction. But I don't think that it will anytime soon. I think that the Republican Party that we're seeing today is here to stay for quite some time. I do think that some people feel like it does need to change, though. But it remains TBD.
Can I throw in one real quick thing? It'll take 10 seconds. The Democratic Party in the United States right now owns small d democracy and small r republicanism. And the Republican Party is 90% the party of Trump, who does not believe in small d democracy or small r republicanism, as we saw in his effort to undo the republic between the election and the inauguration. And I don't know where you go if you're Republican leaders right now in terms of trying to reclaim some piece of one or both of those.
Okay, I want to end with a question that is really interesting me right now, which is the difference between Biden's campaign and Biden's government. You might tell where I'm coming from. I've got my LBJ all the way shirt on to interview you today. And I want to read a passage from the book. Trump had called Biden Sleepy Joe. Unwoke Joe might have been more accurate. That was the ugly truth many Democrats had to face in the aftermath of the 2020 election. To beat Trump, they had to swallow their progressive values and push forward an old white man who simply promised to restore calm. That is absolutely what the campaign was like and how it felt. How do you square that with the great society measures that Biden is suddenly bringing in office? I mean, this is the spending programs are dramatic in terms of what they're intended to change, the effect on poverty that they're trying to have, the effect on climate that they're trying to have. This is a much more aggressive, ambitious agenda than anything Joe Biden campaigned on led me to believe we would have.
Well, I'm glad you're wearing your LBJ shirt. It's certainly appropriate. And LBJ, I mean, the story of him in the United States Senate is that he sucked up to the Southern conservatives to gain power, then became vice president. When he finally got the power that he truly sought as president of the United States, he used it in an extremely progressive fashion. And I would slander Robert Caro by having his name fall from my lips, the great author who wrote the now 4-part biography of Johnson that has at least one more coming. But you see that in the roots of Lyndon Johnson in his youth, teaching Latino kids in South Texas. And this is something he obviously held inside and then sort of projected out once he was safely in power as president. You saw some of it as majority leader in the Senate with the first Civil Rights Act in 1957. With Biden, I actually think it's a little different than FDR and LBJ, who people are talking about, in that FDR and LBJ did the kinds of big structural change that Elizabeth Warren talked about on her campaign. New programs and agencies and ways of doing things, with Johnson, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. With Biden, it's in a way more sophisticated in that or maybe less sophisticated, I don't know. But what Biden's doing is he's pumping huge amounts of money through existing agencies and programs. And so what you're not seeing if you're an opponent of his is that big structural change that you were afraid of, a move to socialism. In the United States, we have Social Security and Medicare. These are socialist-like programs, right? And yet people who are on them and rely upon them are scared of socialism. And so what Biden's doing by pumping money through the existing programs is not saying to people, here's this radical change from what you had before. And yet he's accomplishing the basic goals, or moving to accomplish some of the basic goals of equity that he was, seeking on the campaign trail and talks about more often as president than he ever did on the campaign trail.
Yeah, and I do think that he had to almost throw a bone or two or three to the left wing of the party. That's sort of where the energy of the party is right now. And I do think that a lot of people feel like they helped elect him. And that's sort of that he needed to kind of give them a nod also, and to energize that the progressives and that wing of that is almost the base right now of the party.
And there's nothing like money to paper over the problems in a party.
Yeah, that's for sure. That is for sure. So I have to tell you, in closing, because I've imposed on your time already, my favorite line in the book, I think the one that stays with me, is when you're describing how the respective roles that Clyburn and Warren played in delivering the nomination to Biden, Warren in destroying Bloomberg, and Clyburn, and of course, in everything that he did. And I think you quote somebody as saying, "It's so American that a black man and a woman do all the work and an old white guy walks away with the prize."
Yeah, that's my favorite quote too. We talk about it a lot.
It's pretty good. Listen, everybody who's listening or watching, lucky how Joe Biden barely won the presidency. It's a great read. We didn't get into any of the detail is fantastic. The anecdotes for anybody who's a political junkie are amazing. It's a great read, and along with Shattered, a tremendous contribution to our understanding of American elections. Thank you for writing it, and I couldn't be more pleased that you came on the show to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, David.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too. This was fun. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, totally. Can we come back next week?
Anytime. Anytime.
All right.
I had a lot of fun.
Take care.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye. Be well.
So we're going to talk here for a minute about chops. There are 7 big railroads in North America, the Class 1s, as they're called. And only one of them connects 3 coasts. Our sponsor, CN, has about 20,000 miles of track. Its trains run from the Atlantic to the Pacific, of course, but they also roll down from east and west around the Great Lakes, and then on along the Mississippi, through the American industrial and agricultural heartland, to ports on the Gulf of Mexico. CN literally joins Prince Rupert, BC to Calgary, and to Winnipeg, and Chicago, and New Orleans, and Halifax to Toronto, and Memphis, and Mobile, Alabama. It links seaports around North America. It connects prairie grain farmers and northern mines and forest companies. It creates smooth international loops, providing producers a direct route to factories and manufacturers access to consumer markets. The fact is, only CN can guarantee smooth, safe, effectively borderless shipments through 8 provinces and 16 states. That's called serious chops. Here's another way to think about it. CN is essential to both the Canadian and American economies. Call it the NAFTA Railway. Like I said, chops. All right, Herle Burlyites. If it's Tuesday, you know what it is. It's Jenny Byrne and Scott Reed, here to liven up your week and inform your daily deliberations about politics here in Canada and abroad. Scott has sent a representative by the looks of it, perhaps a cousin from the sticks.
No, it's me. I just got back from a successful 2 years during the Civil War, and I also knocked down Farrah Fawcett Majors and took her hair, so I'm feeling good about that. So I'm finally feathered. That's the key to long hair. It must be feathered. It must feather into a curl, I think, is the Lonnie Anderson beauty secret that I've obviously been sleeping on.
Well, who did you steal the beard from?
Oh, that's just my drunk cousin Carl.
How much have you had to drop your hourly rate since you look like this?
I tend to turn the camera off. I talk about technology problems and buffering and all sorts of shit like that. Fine. CTV's quick calling also. They say, I don't know what's going on. Can we have you on to talk about, I don't know, maybe picking food out of dumpsters.
or out of your beard.
Oh yeah, I get that too. I get all kinds of stuff stuck in there as a, all kinds of Mickey bottles, everything.
Jenny, what's new?
It was a good long weekend. Feel pretty rested. Another, week of work. So, Habs won. I didn't realize until this morning when you told me that Brendan Gallagher's out for a while. That's too bad.
Yeah,
Eric
he's the guy. As I was saying to Rosenberg, Gallagher's the guy when they've got nothing going on that will go out and make something happen. So they are gonna miss him, but encouraging to see that they can be down 2 goals going into the third period and win a game. Didn't years gone by, you wouldn't have that optimism going into a third period. But I get viewer and listener feedback that we talk about the Canadians too much. Do you think that's the case?
Those are just from Leafs fans.
Those are fans. They can
so I just had a super interesting conversation with the authors of a book called Lucky: How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency. And they also wrote the book on the 2016 election and another TikTok called Shattered about the Clinton campaign. They're very experienced at this. It's for those of you who are fans of TikToks, this is a particularly good one. There's some really interesting things in it to chew over. But you know what the biggest takeaway from the book is? Trump should have won.
Right.
If Trump had done anything right, he would have won. If Trump had a better campaign operation, he would have won. If he'd responded marginally differently to COVID, he'd have won. It was really ultimately his to lose. And that is, again, a kind of a jarring reality check. For those of us who were kind of dismissive of him all the way along, the reality is that he ran up against a campaign that pretty much did everything right in the traditional sense, had an inoffensive, most blandly acceptable inoffensive candidate. And even despite the fact that really, everything from his internal campaign operations to his positioning were, offensive to people he was needing to get to vote for him. So, I mean, it's just an interesting thing about how powerful his persona was in American politics and how polarized American politics is.
I've not read the book. Is there analysis that he ought to have won it based solely on him? Because when you look at the state of play for the Republican Party writ large, you look at the demographic trends in the United States and you say these things are starting to look like they're very structurally troublesome for them, which is why they're having to do these voter registration plays, because if they don't tilt the board, they can't win a ball game, right? And so is it back to that fundamental thesis of all things being equal, Trump actually brings out millions of more voters than anyone else will?
Yeah.
Well,
that and the sorry, Jenny, go right ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that is clear in the book and became clear in our interview is that big move that was happening to Trump among Hispanics. The Biden campaign had no idea that was happening.
For sure.
And that is why the Trump people, despite a much less sophisticated polling and data gathering operation than Biden's people had, somehow they knew what was going on. They had a better handle on what was going to happen election night than the Biden people did.
In those 2, 3, 4 counties in Florida in particular, right? That where they're just
all across all the swing states.
Right.
All across all the swing states.
But that's why campaigns matter. So they would know what was going on the ground because they, of course, had organizers there and they could see the momentum as it was going. We've talked about this before. There are times as a ground organizer, I can sense what's going on quicker than the pollsters do, because you get that sense automatically, especially when you're face to face, when you're talking day in and day out with voters. But I think in terms of their analysis, and David, I haven't read the book. We talked about it, and then you sent some snippets for us to read. They're actually things we've talked about before, because as I said, campaigns matter. We knew that Trump had a much less sophisticated, much less disciplined campaign. He did in 2016. It didn't matter against Hillary, her being more a polarizing character, polarizing candidate, and there's probably other things. And in terms of his response to COVID, I think it was almost less COVID, although there was issues there. I think his response to the murder of George Floyd was a really dark period for him and for his campaign. He really was tone deaf, and it really knocked him off what would be his strengths of being the brash guy, the going out and saying how it is. And so kind of for June, July, August, he was someone who was completely on his back foot. In September, it started to change. I would argue that if Trump had handled issues like what happened with George Floyd differently, I think it could have been much different, because they were a campaign that was completely off, thrown off. But if you look at to the point of what you were saying in terms of crowds and door knocking and actually in person, the momentum in the September, October, November, where he was getting major rallies and Biden was sitting in backyards with 10 people, the momentum was really on Donald Trump. That I think those 3 months really made a difference in his campaign. I think if he had had 5 months of that, it probably would have changed the outcome of the election.
Can I throw out one more universal notion?
Jenny, is it Jen? Wait.
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. No, you.
Well, I was going to switch track slightly and just say, less about Trump specifically. And I think in some ways it highlights one of the challenges that successful candidates always have often, and that is that success can breed bad habits. And so I actually think he was, I'll take everything you say there, Jenny, but to it I would just add that I think he was still a more disciplined candidate in 2016. As crazy as he was disciplined in that he had a core offering and it was clear, and he had the wall as a kind of mnemonic device that he could just refer to over and over again. And it told people a whole host of things about who he was and what he stood for and all that. And I think sometimes candidates, when they win an election or they win a leadership, they then shift into a zone where, and it's particularly true once they've been in government. And so now the whole apparatus of government responds to them and says, yes, sir, yes, sir. They tend to become less disciplined sometimes and say, well, I know how to do it. I've done it. I've done it successfully. People told me before I couldn't do it, and I did it. And therefore, they're wrong. I'm right, and I'll be proven right again this time. And I think that Trump was a less disciplined candidate in 2020 than he was in 2016. Every bit as crazy and fucked in the head, but more disciplined. And that lack of discipline, I think, really, really harmed him.
The book is called Lucky. And there's two major elements of luck, I think, that they would attribute, one of which is the fact that the rest of the Democratic Party, led by Barack Obama, literally pulled him out of the ditch and gave him the nomination. Point number one.
Yeah.
And then the lucky thing number two is, they don't say this explicitly, but my read of the book is pretty clearly that the authors believe that if COVID had not happened, Trump would have been reelected.
Hard to dispute that, isn't it? I think. And
I guess
that was not the going. That was not the going in view. Like before COVID, people would have said the likelihood of his reelection is almost nil, just because he's been such a divisive president. And
I disagree. The U.S. was sitting with a 3% unemployment rate heading into heading into when COVID struck, a 3% unemployment rate. So I actually think people would have voted for him. It was they're looking people like. People are working. People are happy. The standard of living was going up. So I think if it hadn't been for COVID, I agree. I think that the chances of him being reelected based on the economic performance alone would have seen his reelection.
Okay, so the scientific method dictates that it has to be repeatable. So did they say anything? Do they say anything on the science of Trump, David, in their book? Do they say this is a replicable phenomenon and that, absent Trump himself, that the Republicans can find a presidential candidate that can recreate those kinds of conditions in 3 years?
No, he's a pretty unique character that way. There is one takeaway from the book that I think has an interesting application for Canada, or an interesting comparison for Canada, and that is that they say that this campaign was the death of persuasion in American campaigns. That partway through, that the Trump campaign never had any interest in persuasion. Trump's whole theory was, if the base is okay, everything else will be okay. And so everything was geared to, what does the base want to hear about this, and what will animate the base? So that was the Trump operating thesis. The Biden people went in with a more traditional, hey, how do we talk to people and get people to vote for us kind of thing. And then they say that O'Malley Dillon realized they couldn't persuade anybody, and that they were more in danger of Biden supporters not voting than they were any prospect of persuading a Trump supporter to vote for them. And so they turned all their advertising into turning soft Biden supporters into strong Biden supporters and making them motivated enough to actually get out and cast a ballot. So now you've got both sides, which are basically agreeing this is a game of trench warfare, and all we do is get as many of our people out as possible, and that's the game. In Canada, we're still generally seeing pretty wide swings in opinion during election campaigns. So we're not seeing that kind of trench warfare yet. So would you agree with me? It's a very different scenario. Persuasion's not dead in Canadian campaigns, is it?
Well, I don't think it. If you're the Conservatives and you're looking at the public polling numbers of the last 2 weeks, you're hoping it's not dead, because otherwise there's no real path to victory for Aaron or the Conservatives if you believe the public polling. So I would say usually at a complete floor, the Conservative base nationally is about 30%, give or take. And right now, if you look at the polls, that kind of has it in the high end. Nanos came out with another poll yesterday that I think has us at 28. 28 seems to be the number that we're kind of floating at. The Liberals.
What's happening?
Well, you've got the Liberals who are now sitting at anywhere in the public polls between kind of 37 and 40, and that's a pretty sweet spot for Trudeau to get back his majority.
But I mean, people don't know. Not enough people know enough about Aaron O'Toole to be forming this kind of negative judgment of him.
Well, I guess they are getting
what's going on.
I guess they are getting they're getting to know him in terms of his and David, you would know this better. His unfavorable numbers for a leader that has just been elected like 8 months ago seem to be higher than any time that I can recognize for any party a leader being at. And I think that and we've talked about this before. I think that the Conservatives, if they continue kind of down the angle, doing the contrast between Justin Trudeau and Aaron O'Toole, a straight man versus man campaign, I think that they're going to. I think they're not going to see a change in the numbers. As we said, we've talked about it. If you go back to the 2004 campaign, that we were on opposite sides. Stephen Harper was the Conservative Party of Canada, the newly formed Conservative Party of Canada, and it was the Conservative brand versus the Liberal brand was what we highlighted. If you go back to ads, our literature, what have you, we were not going to put Stephen Harper up against Paul Martin in the 2004 campaign because you guys pulled so much higher, because Paul Martin pulled so much higher than the Liberal Party. And I think that it might be an awkward conversation to have with the leader and what have you, but I think that obviously the kind of man-to-man contrast that the Conservatives have been doing since Aaron won the leadership races is obviously not working for them in terms of capturing the electorate out there.
Well, I think there's probably lots of answers. I want to go back to your to your question for 1 second. So I think I think there's an interesting difference between Canadian and American politics, an obvious one that affects this issue of whether we've abandoned persuasion or maybe why we've not. And I think the answer is they have a two-party system. I mean, I don't think that abandoning persuasion is a luxury you have if you're the Liberal Party of Canada, at least, because you've got to, during a campaign or in the run-up to a campaign, you've got to poach some of those Green and in particular NDP voters. I mean, collapsing the NDP vote is job number one if you're the federal Liberal Party. It just is. And then if you have the luxury, maybe you try to steal a few sometimes, liberal conservative switchers in, suburban 905 vote areas and all that stuff. But I think that structural difference forces you to maintain a focus on persuasion. I think it may be one of the clues why it's been harder for the Conservatives, because they focus less on persuasion and more on animating the base. And there's a bigger gulf once you come out of the leadership race into a general dynamic that's there to them. And I think we see evidence of that. They're struggling. I think the other problem for O'Toole has been, I don't know if people know him and have concluded they don't like him. I think that people have concluded that they don't like what they're seeing in terms of broad impression as to priority. I think there's been a confused priority in the pandemic in terms of where public health sits versus other priorities. And we've talked about this before, and you and I don't always agree on this, Jenny, but I think that Trudeau has, independent of what you want to say about vaccine rollout and procurement and so on and so forth, I think that people have been left with a general impression that Trudeau is properly motivated on this, and that for 40% of people, which is a pretty good number, they're comfortable with that. And I don't think they've come to the same conclusion about Conservatives. They're confused by Kenney. They're confused by Ford. O'Toole hasn't made an impression on them. When he does fight, it seems to be half the time with his own people. And I just think it's clarity versus lack of clarity. And it's draining him.
Well, I would argue.
So I'm going to say something now, and Jenny, hold fire for just 1 second, because I'm going to say something that's going to have you turn around and shoot my head off my shoulders.
Who, me or Scott?
But you. I am concluding.
Even though I'm the one with the musket?
Yep. When we think of Canada and space missions, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of you, I'm betting it's the Canadarm. Remember the photos? The red maple leaf against that vast sea of blackness? Well, there's a hell of a lot more to the story. It starts in 1969 with a wholly owned Canadian company called MacDonald, Detweiler and Associates, now known as MDA. Theirs is a 51-year history as an international space mission partner and a robotics, satellite systems, and geointelligence pioneer. Like any leader, it's a story of firsts. Canada is the first country with a domestic communications satellite in orbit because of MDA's contributions. They beat NASA engineers in the race to process the first image from CSAT, the world's first radar remote sensing satellite. The Hubble Space Telescope? Canadarm deployed it. MDA launched the world's first commercially focused radar satellite. They built a meteorological station on Mars, invented Dexter, a dual-armed robot for the International Space Station. And MDA has just been tapped for the third-generation Canadarm for a lunar orbiting space station. I just cherry-picked a few out of over 50 firsts. Now, they're leading the charge toward viable moon colonies, enhanced Earth observation, and communication in a hyper-connected world. MDA isn't just Canada's largest space technology developer and manufacturer. They grow our economy, and they advocate for an entire industry. A space company with a big Canadian flag on their backpack. You can find out more about them at www.mda.space. I am concluding, both from conversations with Conservatives and from and from watching conservative governments, especially the Ford government, that the problem you're identifying, Scott, goes far deeper than Aaron O'Toole's leadership. And it's that I don't think that conservatives at this particular juncture in time know what they would do with government. I don't think they know what they would do, what their agenda is if they're in power. It doesn't seem suited, the current circumstances don't seem suited to their ideological toolkit. And I just don't think that the movement itself really has figured out what its role is in this post-deficit COVID environment.
But the conservative,
Jenny, am I wrong?
But yeah, I actually don't even fully understand your point. The Conservative government in Ontario is still leading in the polls. If an election were called today, Doug would win his majority back again. I think all governments have had to figure out how to handle how they've dealt with COVID. I would, going back to Scott. So I completely disagree with that. At least conservative governments are out doing something and aren't hiding in their cottage. We haven't seen Trudeau out in well over a week now, as the issues with vaccine procurement continue. Because regardless of what the rollout is in the provinces, we still don't have enough vaccines. The reason that the U.S. is opening up and the Jays were able to play at a full stadium is that people here, in excess of 4 million people a day, are getting vaccinated in the U.S. So even if the provinces had more of a sophisticated rollout plan, and some of them are starting to get there, we still don't have enough vaccines to actually make it to make a difference right now. And so I think that you've had all governments, regardless of what stripe, NDP, Conservative, or Liberal, that have had to learn how to navigate how to navigate during COVID. And I don't think it's fair to say that the Conservatives are trying to figure out what a post-COVID world looks like, because I think the Liberals are doing the exact same thing. David, we are a country that has not had a budget in well over two years. So it's not like the Liberals are swimmingly going and knowing exactly what's going to happen. I think that Trudeau's sitting there right now cursing the provinces, especially Quebec, Ontario, and Alberta, and BC. Alberta's actually not closing down again, for shutting down and in some cases closing schools, because if you're looking at the polling numbers and you're looking at where things are, you want to go as soon as possible and get an election completely out of the way.
I think people do know what Trudeau's about. I do. You can talk about budget in 2 years and all that kind of stuff. I think that one of the great successes that Trudeau's had over the last year is a simple one. It's been a very simple proposition, which is whatever it takes. I think whatever it takes has become a very deeply rooted, deeply landed political manifesto. And people know that that's what he's about. And not everybody likes it. Like, some people are like, well, I got big concerns about what the debt's going to be and how we're going to manage this. The fundamental offering is public health first, whatever it takes to deal with it. And I would go one step further, which is going to make your head pop off, Jenny. But I actually think the complaint that you just registered, which we are hearing insistently from the Ford government these days, is creating real political jeopardy for not just bullshit. Ford, but other conservatives. Well, let me finish my point before you say it's bullshit. I really do think at a time when 900,000 vaccines are sitting in freezers and another 900,000 are arriving this week, and there is no clarity on how you get a vaccine and who and when and all this, and it's all gummed up, and they're only at 54,000 vaccinations a day instead of 150,000 vaccinations a day in Ontario, I think going to the microphones and complaining that it's a failure of procurement, it's an argument that isn't tracking with people, and we can argue about whether or not it's valid, but it is not tracking with people, and I would argue it's actually backlashing on Ford, and they'd better stop it, because it signals to people that they're more preoccupied with political blame than they are with problem solving, and I think that's a real problem for them.
Well, but I just want
to say to my listeners and viewers that you can try to stay away from COVID and these things if you want. You can try not to talk about COVID, but you can't stop talking about COVID. Anyway, Jenny, go ahead.
Well, I think to go back to the original point, though, Trudeau will do whatever it takes. He throws money at things, but he actually doesn't take responsibility for anything. He has left that 100% with the premiers. If it was whatever he took, there would have been some kind of national strategy dealing with provinces in terms of let's not just say procurement, but actually distribution. So he is basically in terms of guidelines, in terms of whether businesses should be shut down, schools should be closed. The federal government has shown no leadership on that. They've given money.
You're arguing for a more interventionist federal government that would impose itself on areas of exclusive provincial jurisdiction?
No,
that would be the kind of argument I'd expect from me.
I'm arguing that there could have been some form of national coordination, like this coordination in certain aspects of this. But what, David?
I want to pick up on both of your comments. I want to pick up, if we're going to get into COVID, let's get into it. And the question that I want to ask,
I would prefer not to get into COVID.
I don't have to go deeper. Whatever you want.
But here's the question. I agree with both of you. There is enough blame for every government to go around in this story. It is evident, and I don't think Jenny would dispute it, that the Ford government's vaccine rollout is a fucking disaster. And
but I think But I think provinces all over the place. I think the BC rollout with Oregon is. I don't think there's any province that is actually doing this to any measure. It's varying degrees. Ontario just happens to be the biggest province, and that's who the federal government. Like, despite Scott, you saying the Ford government, Ford has been a lot more kind and complimentary to Trudeau and the federal government than what it has been reciprocated the other way around.
Okay, I just want to lay out my thesis, and then everybody can kill it. My thesis is that both levels of government have been doing a lousy job through COVID, is the truth of the matter. A year later, we all like to give them the benefit of the doubt last spring, but the feds didn't get enough vaccines fast enough. And they made lots of fuck off. They made lots of mistakes. That's my phone ringing. I don't know who the hell calls me during the pod. Anyway, the feds have made lots of mistakes. We talked about that Tonda McCharles article in the Star. It was a great diagnostic of everything that they did wrong. And now a year later, we know all that. And then there's been the provincial governments waxing and wanings about lockdowns and openings and minor tinkering here and there. Everybody's been, and the second and third wave management at the provincial level defies description. So at the end of all that, as Jenny says, the polls tell us that if there was an election today, Ford would be reelected. The polls tell us that Trudeau would get a majority. The polls tell us that Legault would sweep back into power enormously. Everybody, with the possible exception of Jason Kenney, would be returned, for sure, in office right now. So a year after what seems evidently now to have been a mistake-riddled response by governments at both levels, why are they still so popular?
Well, I think people. I think to the point that someone's made, either it was earlier today or before, is that there's not really certainty as to what governments would have done. Canadians, I'm not sure what governments would have done different. I know I would like to think, as I said before, what a conservative government federally would have done if past iterations, if me and my former colleagues were there. But I think for the most part, people have been like, we're not happy, but everyone's kind of in the same boat. I think you're going to see that starting to change. I've seen a real, since Ontario, for example, on Thursday announced their further shutdown, not lockdown, shutdown measures across the province. You have regions of the country that have had regions of the province that have had virtually no COVID, especially the regions up north that are now under the same not stay at home, but shutdown order that people in Toronto and Peel and other hotspots have. And it's the, patios in Toronto can open for 3 days, then they have to shut for 3 days. And so I think I've seen a real change in how in actual people's moods. And I think you're going to see it both at a federal and provincial level. I just want to say, though, picking back, and this was like from 10 minutes ago in terms of, what Canadians or what people expect from Erin O'Toole. I think that part of the problem and part of the reason that the Liberals have been able to kind of skate on the fact that we are massively behind vaccine procurement to other countries, especially to the US and other countries, is because nobody in opposition talked about it. And so when back in December, when we've said this, Aaron and the Conservatives rarely actually even talked about vaccines, and they're not even talking about it. It now. So it just as Stephen Del Duca and Andrea Horwath really don't actually go after any Achilles heel that Doug has, is that opposition parties have basically acquiesced and let governments proceed without any form of criticism. And I would argue that, you know, the official opposition of any form of government in our country, in our system, their job is to actually be critical of certain government policies, whether we're in a pandemic or not. We've been in this for over a year, and I think that, to your point, we've talked about this before. One of the only opposition leaders in the entire country that has been consistently going after a COVID response has been Andrea Horwath in Alberta, and one could argue that has probably contributed to some of the
Rachel Notley.
Rachel Notley.
Yeah, you misspoke. Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel Notley. She has consistently gone after the UCP government and their COVID response, and one would argue that's part of the reason why Jason's polling numbers in terms of incumbent governments are different than everywhere else across the board.
I'll make a very different point. I'll come at it with a really completely different thesis, and if my thesis is correct, it would mean that to pursue Jenny's strategy would be political cancer. And my thesis is this. I think that we've had a year of evidence that people have decided they are going to suspend competence as a criteria they use to mark government. And I mean that as absurd as it sounds, I mean it sincerely, because I think that people in their own minds in this global pandemic circumstance have concluded that it is very difficult for them to assess, even in the face of horrifying government failures like the early procurement of vaccines, like long-term care homes. People have concluded that they are reluctant to assign blame to government because they're having trouble figuring out, well, how much of this is a global dynamic that nobody could have done better, and we all would be handcuffed in trying to arrange. And so I think there's been a reluctance to mark governments on the basis of competence for some time. And so instead, they're marking governments on the basis of, do they seem to be properly motivated as I, as a voter, would mark? And I think since a plurality, if not a majority of voters say, what I'm really looking for is a sentiment that's like, whatever it takes, public health first, whatever it takes, that, and I would argue that was what Ford sent and sort of sunk early in this thing a year ago, and why he was getting accolades. And Jenny always makes fun that I was saying that he was on the right track tonally and all that stuff. I think there's a commonality of folks. And I think you can make an argument that Kenney was less consistent on those things and gave people rise to be concerned about what was motivating him, whether he was struggling with, no, I'm more concerned about freedom and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that people... And the question is, when will they return to applying the criteria of competence? And for example, will it happen in Ontario? Will we find that the combination of the inability to roll out vaccines and the combination of an ineffective shutdown that doesn't clamp down on the variant will end up in combination harming Ford? And a part of me thinks probably not. A part of me thinks we'll find 6 to 8 weeks from now, there'll be a critical mass of vaccinations, and he'll have skated through it. And I think it's because of this issue that people have decided they're going to suspend competence. And that's great for a government, particularly like Trudeau, who's perfect at signaling motivation and a value proposition, and has consistently for 5 years been weak on execution. This environment is set up perfectly for him.
I don't disagree with that. And actually, I think you and I are somewhat saying the same thing. You're just saying that people are motivated by seeing politicians working together. And I'm saying that the reason people have knee-jerked and said, we can let these guys off for being incompetent is because they've been given no compelling reason as to why they shouldn't. So
yeah, but see, we don't agree on that. I think if you stood up and did a hardcore run at them, people would say, you're being too negative. I don't want to hear it.
People said that about Biden. We talked about that earlier. COVID, if we go by the book that David was talking about, COVID was part of the reason that Biden won. The Democrats went hard on Trump on his COVID response, and so
I heard a lot of polling data though from folks who said you got to be really careful about how you threaded the needle against Trump, because if you said that the failures were Trump's fault, people would recoil and say, no, it's not his fault. This thing came from the sky.
I think it's like everyone that says for the first 3 days of a snap election call that they don't like an election. I think they might say, oh, we want everyone working together. But I think if you look at governments, the ones that have had their feet held to the fire are been the ones that have actually had a healthy and responsible opposition, because that's the job of the opposition parties. One could understand for the first 3 or 4 months of the pandemic when no one really knew what was happening, but we're over a year into this. And I think that people, Scott, to your point, are giving governments a free ride and they're willing for them to be incompetent. My argument is it's not altruistic or out of the goodness of their hearts. I think it's because they've been given no alternative. They've been given no alternative thought messaging as into terms to why governments have actually fucked up certain things, all levels of government over the last year.
Well, let's just
Jenny, you're making the same argument. You're making the same argument. You're making the same argument that people make about negative ads, which is basically people hate them. They say you're a jerk for running them, but they alter people's perceptions of the people that you're advertising against.
100%.
Yeah. Whereas I'm saying, I'm saying that people have, because of the peculiar circumstances of this situation, decided that they're going to put competence in the freezer with those 900,000 vaccines, and it's not clear to me when they're going to take it out and begin applying it to government as a criteria of electability again. And I wouldn't hold my breath thinking that the Ford government's about to pay a punishing price for its management of this rollout. I think people will be pissed off, and then I think it will fade.
You know, Scott, what I think about that, and I think about this a lot lately, is something Donolo said on this show, Peter Donolo, when you were away in the summer, which is, what are the chances that the federal government has spent, I don't know, $600, $700 billion in the last 2 years, and that there aren't 10 scandals in there?
There would be.
Yeah. So at some point, this is going to start to roll out, right? At some point, there's going to be an examination of all this spending, and there's going to be some unpleasant surprises in there, almost certainly.
Well, like we.
Maybe that's when competence comes back.
Like we, because if you actually look, the only time federally the Conservatives have actually blipped up in the polls in the last year was when we was on the front pages and the Kilburgers were doing their Game of Thrones type testimony in the summer.
And when you throw that much money out the door that quickly, you're going to get problems, right? I mean, God, routine infrastructure expenditures are always ugly when you look under the hood.
So, one last thing about Ford, because Ford, I think, and let's try to approach this in a fair and dispassionate, analytical way. Ford has a constituency in the province that would have preferred no lockdowns at all, would have preferred, or very modest, would have preferred the personal responsibility, personal freedom side of the equation, and also has a very strong small business constituency, many of whom have had their livelihoods threatened by the lockdowns, etc. So he would have been under a lot of pressure from that side. And then, of course, there's a lot of pressure from other Ontarians to put public health absolutely front and center, to have a zero COVID policy. He has satisfied neither one of those groups of people by attempting to find some balance between them. I'm going to say that he's leaned more toward the interference lockdown control than he has toward the personal freedom, but lots of people will say he's made a lot of mistakes on the opening up side, which I won't dispute. But my point is that he hasn't picked a lane. He's not Ron DeSantis, and he hasn't picked a lane. He's tried to find balance. Normally in our brokerage system of politics, that is an admirable trait, and that is something that we look for in leaders. Now, it hasn't served him badly politically. As we said, he's in shape for re-election. But it doesn't seem like either his base is tremendously happy with him, nor have the health critics been satisfied. But maybe he's found some nice, sweet, ordinary person spot in which to land. I don't know. What do you two think about the choices he's had and the choices he's made?
Go ahead, Scott. You can start.
Well, I do think he's employed. He's expressly invoked the notion of balance and said, "Look, folks, I got to make the balance." And I think that may be a flawed assumption in this circumstance. Balance doesn't really work. I'm going to close patios and hair salons so that I'm seen to be doing something, but not doing so much that I actually affect the variant. And so I don't know that balance actually serves you very well in the current environment. I'm not sure it even serves a political purpose. I think the reason for his political standing goes back to the sunk in signals he sent a year ago about fundamentally we're going to be motivated by public health. That's what's going to and I think that he sank that message so clearly that's been a residual stone of support for him. I think this next period is going to test him because he is getting it from both sides. I think the variant is going to tear through Ontario and particularly Toronto in a really terrifying way in these next 2, 3, 4 weeks, and it will outpace vaccinations, obviously. So he may get it from both sides, who are both unhappy with the choice, and the balance will be particularly exposed in this next stretch as an inadequate solution on any side. But, maybe there's an argument that everything I think and say on Twitter each day as I'm enraged is wrong, right? And what that means is I'm like, Christ, we can see this boulder coming. Why don't we respond to it? Like 10 schools in the TDSB and the Toronto School Board have been shut down today, right? And yet they're insisting, look, we're not going to end up shutting all schools down after this break in April. Yes, they are, right? I wonder if part of their thesis is, look, don't leap to the last spot. Get dragged there, be seen to be dragged there, and maybe that pays off politically. I don't think so, but you could look at the results and say maybe they're right and I'm wrong.
Well, I think that
terrible sets of choices they've faced, Jenny. What do you think about the ones they've made?
Well, I think that ultimately what Doug and other governments have said is that they're relying on the health table. It's medical experts that are making all the decisions, and we've actually seen that's to be true. Not just with Ontario, you see the chief medical officer of Peel came out and shut down the schools without the support of the mayor, without the support of Patrick Brown or council. So unelected medical officers are actually starting to dictate public policy and how it affects constituents. Can you imagine being a two-parent home where both parents have to go to work? They're essential workers, or a single-parent home, and you find out 3 hours before the end of the long weekend that you have to figure out what to do in terms of not just childcare, but as Scott has talked about, the online learning, which you can't just stick a 7-year-old in front of a computer and expect them to be able to do everything. And so I think that the concern that people have, whether they've been on my side, which I've been very vocal about in terms of lockdown, or on the other side, is that none of the decisions seem to be being made on science either way. And so, you can't go get your hair cut in Toronto, you can't go get your nails done, but 5,000 people went to the Yorkdale Shopping Center on the weekend and went shopping. I'm not sure if you guys saw the videos online. It was packed, 5,000 people. Yeah. And so for people, regardless of where you stand on the spectrum, you're like, well, this makes no sense. There absolutely can be no scientific reason as to why, a hairdresser can't have, two people on opposite ends of their salon, right, doing hair, but yet 5,000 people can go shopping at the Yorkdale Shopping Center. And so I think that there has not been scientific reasons. There has not been scientific reasons given for decisions, I would argue, for the last year. And I know we've been having, unfortunately for our poor listeners, we've been having these debates for going on 14 months now. And I think that's the problem in terms of a lot of the decisions that governments are making and where people people stand on the spectrum. But I think what we have seen is there was only the Sunday, I believe it was, there was only 222 deaths related to COVID in the entire U.S. And so we saw the Texas Rangers and the Jays play to a full stadium. We've seen California has announced that they're going to allow in-person spectators at baseball and hockey and basketball games coming up in the next week. And so I think what it has shown us is, whether you want to argue that there was problems in procurement with vaccines, which there was, and problems in the distribution of vaccines, which there are, it is the only way that we are going to get back to some form of normalcy in life, is if we get vaccines in people's arms.
For sure. Here's one piece of science for you. Just one last thing. When we talk about parents with kids in school, okay? My kids come out of isolation. There was a breakout in their school, an outbreak in their school, so they come out of isolation this week in a day. Obviously, I'm not going to send them back to school for 2 days, and then we'll see what happens after the break. But one health statistician, put out a notice saying right now in TDSB, there's a 34 to 40% chance that your child is getting exposed to the variant if they're sitting in a classroom. And I got to tell you, that's weighing on my mind a lot. It's very, very hard for me, and I'm not a factory worker, but it's very hard for me, even in making money off of writing and talking to my television screen here, my computer screen. It's very hard for me to get through the day when both kids are home, both young kids are home. But I'm really struggling with sending my kids back to school in late April if there's a 40% chance that somebody beside them has the variant. And I think a lot of families are going to be put in that position. And maybe I have the luxury of considering that and others don't, but I still am struggling with it.
Yeah, no, I think you're not, I'm not going to say lucky, but you're in a position where you can actually work from home. There essential workers can't, but I'm curious, and this isn't me, I'm genuinely asking, where is that study from? Because everything I've read up until this point that's been public is they have done massive asymptomatic tests of kids in schools, and there's almost kids have a greater chance of contacting COVID outside the school as opposed in the classrooms.
It's this biohealth statistician who is online from UHN. So I myself am asking for greater confirmation of that figure because I find it an alarming number. But I also don't find it hard to believe because I'm seeing the cases rise and I'm seeing, the hospitalizations rise. A cousin of mine runs 3 hospitals.
Well, wait, Scott, can I stop you? Yeah. We're fighting the last war, right?
That's right.
We're fighting the war against what I mean is right now, all of our policies are geared toward the original strain of COVID. And it seems nothing in terms of our vaccination rollout or our procedures understands that this is a completely different beast. So no, the first one wasn't that big a deal in schools, but the variant's a completely different beast when it comes to infecting young people and transmitting among young people. So that's why it feels to me like our policies are all outdated because they're based on a different version of the virus. But I
Jenny's right. There's only one answer, and that's to vaccinate. Right. The only answer is we're in a foot race. We won't win this goddamn foot race, and so it's just a question of how much does the variant overwhelm us until there's a critical mass of vaccinations. There's not going to be another remedy to it.
All right, Scotty, I'm going to put you on the spot.
All right.
Mark Carney.
Yeah.
Mark Carney appears to be unveiling himself as a partisan liberal this week. He's a featured speaker at the National Liberal Convention this week. Let's assume that Mark Carney, our old friend Jean Lapierre used to quote Head and Shoulders and say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Assuming Mark Carney wants to be the leader of the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister of Canada, what does he need to do in this speech?
I think that he needs to declare himself a partisan. I think first of all, there's no point. One thing he should not do is attend the Liberal Convention and then try to balance a fiction where he says, look, I'm here solely because I have a book and a set of policy ideas, and I'll go to any grand forum and gathering and share my views. Don't do that, right? You're making an explicit, proactive choice to go into a partisan setting. So first and foremost, say, folks, I am a liberal. And I'm considering public life. Like, get that out there and get people, and just, don't run the risk of looking like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. Just be transparent about that. Don't bullshit. Second, talk about your book, talk about that value set, and talk about where that might take you in terms of forward-looking ideas that are beyond the status quo. And be appealing, be funny, be charming, be all the things that people like in political leaders. And then we'll see. And then the thing you have to do is run the next election. Like pay your dues. Don't say, I'm going to wait, see if Trudeau doesn't run after the next election. If he does run, and don't do any of that. If you're going to be a partisan and you want to enter public life, and if one of your ambitions, and we all know how hard it is to have all those stars aligned to actually become the leader and prime minister, if that's what you would like to do, then the first step on that journey is to declare yourself a partisan. And the second step is to run, and to run as an MP. Just do that. So get those things out of the way. And don't bullshit, and don't pussyfoot around, and don't pretend that you're not something that you are. Just lay it out.
Wait, one thing. How does he do this without pissing off the prime minister? Like, I mean, I remember Ignatieff's fucking speech to the 2005 Liberal Convention. And I hated it for two reasons. One of which is he's an instantly hateable person, just to see him speak. But the second thing is that the clear implication of his speech was that he'd be a better prime minister than Paul.
Yeah.
And that, if I was there, here are the smarter things I would be doing than what you're doing. How does Carney sound super smart and with new ideas, but not come off like, as opposed to that empty suit you got sitting in Longeville?
It's not that hard.
You guys gave Iggy a seat, though. You're the one. You gave him a platform at the convention, and you pushed out a Liberal MP and gave him a seat.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Well, you make that sound like we're fucking idiots. Look,
we were not dumb. We were not dumb, Jenny. We were weak.
Well, we might have had interns there with all of Iggy's quotes, like when he called Ukrainians little Russians and stuff. So we were at that nomination meeting too.
But I don't think you have to be Ignatieff. I think it's possible to give that speech and to be and to seem like you're being respectful towards Trudeau, and not a knob. And I think Ignatieff's fundamental problem was that he came off as a knob, and then we got that in full dose, and it ended up in 2011 in a majority for Harper. So I think, I said it earlier, be charming, be charming, man. Like, don't speak in the first person nonstop. There's a little tip for you.
Okay, so yes, Michael Ignatieff was loathsome. We've had that conversation many times on the pod. But in terms of actually character, in terms of who they are, the similarities are very, very, very much there. They're successful in their past careers. Of course, you guys recruited him from Goldman Sachs. He made a lot of money on capitalism, which he doesn't really talk about much anymore, and feels that I believe the world should go into a different direction now that he's made all his money. He then went on to become obviously was the governor of the Bank of Canada.
You can smell the fear just rolling off her, huh?
No, never, not since.
Open the knives already.
Well, no, listen, I don't think you want to underestimate any of your opponents, but Carney has actually weighed in on politics. Let's not forget he weighed in on Brexit. He made the very unusual step for the governor of the Bank of England to actually step in and campaign against Brexit, and all his doomsday scenarios actually turned out to be not correct. And he actually was, I think, looked pretty embarrassing. He had to backtrack. He was trying to say that the financial sector would crash, that financial institutions were going to move out of London, and he was very, very vocal about it to help David Cameron. So I think we've already seen his foray into politics and the judgment that he shows. So I think that what he's got. If he doesn't want to have the comparisons to Iggy, he's actually going to show that So what? I was like the highest paid country for the Bank of England. He was one of the highest paid heads of the banks in the entire world while he was living in London, as well as received well over £1 million and as well as receiving a housing allowance. His problem is going to be, when has he talked to real people, real average Canadians, and that will be the challenge. It'll be interesting to see how he does the speech. It'll be interesting to see how he conducts himself otherwise, because he's also a guy that outside the Brexit stuff, he's been obviously trained, and his over the last decade or so of saying very innocuous things that will not change, will not affect the markets. And so he's actually the communication between the economic and financial institution communication and political communications, as you guys know,
very different.
Very different. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he has done to kind of course correct probably where his mindset is. And to Scott's point, then. He's got to pick a riding. You guys gave Iggy Jean Augustine's riding in Etobicoke Lakeshore, which was safe for him for a couple elections, and then he lost to us in 11. So Carney's got to pick a riding where he needs to that is winnable. And we've talked about Trudeau. Kudos to Trudeau. He wanted Outremont back leading into 08, and the party Dion gave him Papineau, and he had to actually scrape and claw. He only won that by 2% of the vote in that first election.
There's one, I was going to say, in fairness, there's one huge difference between him and Ignatieff, and I won't get into whether one's more charming than the other or smarter than the other, but he knows Canada like the back of his hand. Like Michael Ignatieff knew nothing about Canada. His reference points to Canada were Lester Pearson. So Carney is much more familiar with the current environment in Canada. See, Jenny's fundamental point, though, whether he can turn from being a very effective financial communicator to a very effective political communicator is one of the things everybody will be watching.
The ballgame.
We're almost out of time, and we've got to have a Hey You. So, Scott, start us off. Hey You.
Hey You. My Hey You is to Doug Ford, and it's pretty simple. The variant is tearing through Ontario. It's particularly tearing through the GTA. Closing down patios didn't do the trick. Get real. Get us into a situation where people get sick leave so that all those folks who work in those industrial bakeries and other in-tight factory jobs where spread is happening, allow those people to take a couple days off. I know someone personally in my life whose husband was sick for 3 days, and he was reluctant to take the time off because he couldn't afford to take the time off. And that's why sick leave is so important. It should have been done a long time ago. It needs to happen now. Vaccinate all the teachers on the one hand and give sick leave for those industrial workers on the other. And maybe, just maybe, we'll come through this a little better. So that's my Hey You.
All right, my Hey You goes out to Chrystia Freeland. I'm going to go first. I'm going to let you close the show, Jenny.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you close the show because you're the only one that looks like you prepared for it in any way. My Hey You goes out to Chrystia Freeland. You're almost done your budget. The ink is probably starting to dry on the sheets. And this whole process started with a prorogation last summer so that the government could think about what its priorities going forward ought to be and what the country needed in a post-COVID world. You've since signaled that you have $70 to $100 billion to invest in the future. Right now, people are pushing you not to do that. Look at what Biden is doing in the States. $6 trillion of investment in America. $6 trillion. The equivalent in Canada would be $600 billion. Do not lose your nerve. Go big. Do it. Make some fundamental changes while the money and the will is there. That's my Hey You, Chrystia Freeland. Follow through. Jenny?
Well, and as for Chrystia, I was going to mention when we were talking about Mark Carney, I think there's one person that wants to see him on stage less than Trudeau. I believe it would probably be her, but that's, my Hey You, I'm going back to vaccines and I'm going to be quick. My Hey You is to all politicians in Canada. I think it's safe to say we know that procurement has definitely been an issue as to the vaccines that Canada has secured. Obviously, the provinces are having issues getting them out in any kind of mass way. I think that, to Scott's point, I still think that opposition politicians should act like opposition politicians, regardless of their political stripes. But maybe it's time, as you see the US opening up, as people are going to sporting events, schools are at full capacity, restaurants are at full capacity, and people refer to the pandemic in the past tense as opposed to the present. I think maybe it's time that the government's actually, instead of saying they're working together, instead of standing up and pretending to work together, maybe over the next 6 months, they could actually work together to ensure Canadians get vaccines in their arms, and we can start to open up and go on with our lives.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jenny, for today. A lot of fun and very informative as always. I want to thank Jonathan Allen and Amie Parnes for coming on the show to talk about their book, Lucky. I want to thank the Air Quotes Media team that put this on. And thank you, all listeners and viewers, for tuning in for another week. We'll be back next week, presumably, with more COVID.